Garfield received substandard medical care after being shot, which probably contributed more to his death than the wound itself. He died of sepsis, an infection that may result from any wound, but in his case most likely resulted from a series of non-sterile wound probes by his doctors. His doctors took every other antiseptic measure throughout the case, but explored the wound with their bare hands at least 14 times, repeatedly engaging in a practice thoroughly condemned by medical texts of the day. They also brought in Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, who had also invented a crude metal detector to see if he could find the location of the bullet. They hoped to do surgery. Unfortunately, the president was lying on a bed with metal bed springs, so when they used the machine, it appeared that the bullet was too deeply embedded for them to safely do surgery. They didn't know that the metal bed springs were underneath where Garfield was resting. So basically the machine didn't work. Little in Arthur's past raised hopes about his effectiveness as president, but as president he became a civil service and tariff reformer. The Pendleton Civil Service Act, passed in January 1883, set up a 3-member civil service commission independent from the regular cabinet departments, the first such federal agency established on a permanent basis. It created a merit system of making appointments to office on the basis of aptitude rather than who you knew. About 14% of all government jobs came under the category of classified services, in which new appointments had to be made on the basis of competitive examinations. Think in terms of the post office. Even today, you have to take a competitive exam in order to get a job at the post office. Then, so when the next election came, about 1884, Arthur's record might have recommended him to the voters, but it did not set well with the other leaders of his party. An even more compelling reason for Arthur's withdrawal was the fact, unknown to the public, that he had contracted Bright's disease, a fatal kidney inflammation from which he would die in 1886. So the Republicans threw their support behind Senator James G. Blaine of Maine. He lost support because of letters that surfaced that indicated that he was up for sale to the railroads. On the other side, the Democrats chose Grover Cleveland. He was a lawyer and first attracted national attention as mayor of Buffalo for battling graft and corruption. He was also elected governor of New York, and he seemed to be a wonderful example of integrity and honor. Then the Buffalo Evening Telegraph revealed some of Bachelor Cleveland's earlier escapades with an attractive Buffalo widow, Maria Halpine. She had named Cleveland as the father of a child born to her in 1874, though there was no proof of paternity. Cleveland, it seemed, was one of several likely fathers, but took responsibility and provided for the child. The Democrats really hated that. They wanted him to deny the child. They wanted him to deny that this had ever happened, but he stepped up and said that he could be the father, that he had supported the child, and he was not going to deny it to the public. Near the end of the campaign, Blaine and his supporters committed 2 fateful blunders. At New York's fashionable Delmonico's restaurant, Blaine went to a private dinner with several millionaire bigwigs to discuss campaign finances. Cartoons and accounts of the feast showed up in the opposition press for days to come. And when a delegation of Protestant ministers visited Republican headquarters in New York, the Reverend Samuel D. Bouchard referred to the Democrats as the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion in a very insulting tone. Blaine, who was present, let pass and perhaps failed to catch the implied insult to Catholics, a fatal oversight since he had always cultivated Irish-American support with his anti-British talk and public reminders that his mother was Catholic. Democrats spread the word that he had let the insult pass, even that he had made the comment himself. That may have tipped the election and caused him to lose the election to Cleveland. Cleveland held to a strictly limited view of government's role in both economic and social matters, a rigid philosophy illustrated by his 1887 veto of the Texas Seed Bill, an effort to appropriate $10,000 to meet the urgent need of drought victims for seed grain. Cleveland supported civil service as much as he could, but his party had been out of office for a long time, so he was forced to hedge on that. He supported the Pendleton Act, but inserted an exception: those who had used federal offices to forward the interest of the opposition party. In many cases, especially in the post offices, he then had ample excuse to remove men who had practically made their offices into Republican headquarters. When he left office, about 2/3 of the federal office holders were Democrats. On other matters, Cleveland's stubbornness led him to have conflicts with some powerful people, which will cost him the presidency. Secretary of the Interior and Commissioner of the General Land Office, these two men uncovered several cases of fraud, public lands used by lumbermen, mine owners, and cattlemen with the help of government officials, and at least 30 million acres of railroad land grants subject to forfeiture because the required lines were not built. The administration brought suit against railroads to recover such lands and against the Montana Improvement Company, subsidiary of the Northern Pacific Railroad, for cutting trees on public forest lands. In all, during Cleveland's first term, about 81 million acres of public lands were restored to the federal government. And that's going to make him some really powerful enemies. Nevertheless, he was the nominee for his party as the election of 1888 approached. The Republicans turned to Benjamin Harrison, grandson of former President William Henry Harrison, a flourishing lawyer in Indiana, and he had a good war record. Personal attacks were leveled against Cleveland. After Cleveland entered the White House, he had married Frances Folsom, who later presented him with a daughter whose name would be immortalized by the Baby Ruth candy bar. Frances was 21 when they married, and he was 27 years older. She had been his ward, and he had helped her mother to raise her. In any case, during the campaign, the rumor went around that a drunken Cleveland had taken to wife-beating. There was no truth to that, but that was the rumor. On the eve of the election, Cleveland suffered a more devastating blow from the phony Murchison letter. A California Republican named George A. Osgoodby had written British minister Sir Lionel Sackville West using the phony name Charles F. Murchison. Posing as an English immigrant, he asked advice on how to vote, and Sackville West indicated that he should vote for Cleveland. Published on October 24th, the letter aroused a storm of protest against foreign intervention in U.S. elections, some of what's going on now. Cleveland was vindicated in the popular vote, which he won, but it didn't give him a whole lot of comfort since he lost the electoral vote and Benjamin Harrison becomes the president. Interesting thing about Cleveland is he loses this election. Harrison serves one term, and then Harrison and Cleveland will come back together and they will run against one another, and in that election Cleveland will win, and he will become the only president in our history to serve two non-consecutive terms.